I think by now we all know about my, I'm going to call it obsession with true crime. So it shouldn't be any shock today that I'm talking with Emmy-winning and Oscar-nominated filmmaker Liz Garbus, whose latest docuseries, Gone Girls, The Long Island Serial Killer, is now streaming on Netflix. Liz takes us deep, very deep, into a story that started with the gruesome discovery of more than 10 victims and a serial killer who hunted his prey while living they all seem to, mild-mannered life on the South Shore of Long Island. Gone Girls also unravels a twisted web of corruption within the ranks of the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, as well, but wait, there's more, offers up a glimpse into the mind of the man accused of committing these murders. Liz is also the director of Good American Family, which is now streaming on Hulu. Liz, welcome to Group Text.
Thanks, Melissa. Nice to be here.
So, okay, there's so many different parts of your career that I'm going to have, you're going to have to bear with me while I kind of explain where it all came from. Okay, so what drew you to this story? Because before the docuseries in 2022, you directed a feature film about this called Lost Girls, which starred Gabriel Byrne. What made you want to go back to this story after making the based on a true story actual feature to say, wait a minute, I want to go back and do a docuseries?
They got the guy, number one. And number two, by the time I returned to the story, got with Gone Girls, with the series that you're talking about on Netflix, there had been a massive corruption scandal exposed at Suffolk County. We did not know the contours of that when we were making our film Lost Girls. Lost Girls came out in 2020 on Netflix, and it was based on a script that was based on the book called Lost Girls, which had incredible reporting about the victims' lives. And but all of this other stuff has come to light since, and it felt like it was time to return and get the whole story down.
Because most directors don't necessarily pivot from, feature and TV directing to docuseries and back again. How did you have to change your mindset as a director in telling the story from a completely different angle? Because it's as a director, it's two distinct different points of view coming at this almost the same topic.
Yeah, right. So I pivot between scripted and documentary. I've done that my whole career. I started my career in documentary, making films, I've been interested in the criminal justice system. I've also made films about amazing, incredible Americans like Nina Simone, Bobby Fischer, who have lived these like historic culture-changing lives. So I've worked in a lot of different sandboxes for a long time. So for me, it felt really natural. There was all this story to tell. The point of view of Lost Girls, the scripted film, is really from the mother of a young woman who went missing, Shannan Gilbert. And it turns out that the 4 bodies that were found also near where Shannan's body was found, which we now know as the Gilgo 4, which we now know Rex Heuermann is waiting for trial to be convicted of those murders and others. Shannan's story is actually off to the side. So this is, in fact, like it is very complicated, Melissa, because there's also different like victim groups here, and the different films have addressed them in different ways. I hope that answers your question. But for me, it was a natural reflex to go to the documentary because God, there was so much story. And in this case, like the truth was almost less believable than fiction.
Because each episode, I felt like told a different story in a way. And now that I think about it, all 3 could be separate features.
Thank you. Well, yes, I think the first episode focuses on the young women and the lives they were leading and how they got taken and stolen out of those lives. And then the second episode is sort of asking the question, well, why did this go on for so long? And we start to peel away the layers of what was happening within the police department. And then the third episode is, okay, who is this guy? So yes, they are distinct in that way. Of course, every episode involves the victims and their families and their plight, but yes, they each have a different theme and a question that they're exploring.
I want to ask you, let's start with Shannan Gilbert, because what happened to her seems to be the catalyst for all these events that will unfold over the next few years. Tell us, for people who haven't seen it, who is Shannan and what happened to her on May 1st, which coincidentally is the day we are taping this episode.
Oh God. Yeah. Well,
Woo!
yeah. Shannan Gilbert was a young woman born and raised in upstate New York with a family of three sisters and the daughter of Mary Gilbert. She was a student and was also working part-time as a sex worker on Craigslist. And one night, I guess it was is it April 30? 30 or
May
31.
1st.
So,
May
right,
1st.
right. Well, I'm just saying the night she went on the date, but on that she
Right.
went on a date on the night of May 1st. And the whoever was the client was a man named Joe Brewer who lived in Oak Beach, had offered a good enough money that she would drive all the way out from New Jersey, all the way through the five boroughs into Long Island, all the way down Ocean Parkway to a little community on the end of one of those barrier islands, very, very isolated, to Joe Brewer's house. Something happened that night in that date that frightened Shannan. And she ran out. She had a driver who brought her the date, Michael Pack. He was waiting outside. Joe Brewer came out and said, I can't get her to leave. I can't get her to leave. She's freaking out. We hear Shannan on 911 saying, they're trying to kill me. She won't leave with Michael Pack, her driver. She ends up running down the street in this little community of Oak Beach, asking for help, saying they're trying to kill me. She knocks on a door, Gus Coletti. He says, well, hold on, I'm going to call the police. She kept running. She kept going. She knocks on another woman's door. That woman doesn't open the door for her. And then she disappears into the night. The next day, her mother and her sister actually they got some strange phone calls from some people in the community, specifically a guy named Peter Hackett. They started to call Shannan. She wasn't answering her phone. So they started to call the police. The police never really took them seriously. Oh, she's a sex worker. She'll come back. She'll show up. But they had plans with her. And when she didn't show up, they knew something was wrong. This was not someone who just went on benders and didn't call them back for weeks and weeks. This was their daughter, their sister. They knew something was wrong. She hadn't talked to her
Right.
boyfriend either. So this mother wouldn't take well, she just went missing. There's nothing we can do about it for an answer. And she raised hell, as mothers
Yes.
do. And that hell raising led to a web of other victims and searches finally happening off Ocean Parkway in Long Island, which ended up turning up bodies, body after body after body. Not even Shannan Gilbert's body, 10 other bodies, 12 other bodies. And then finally, a year later, Shannan's body.
So just to go back to Shannan, which I was very interested
Yeah.
in, and Michael Pack, her driver, no one ever really answered the question of what was she running from and why she didn't just jump in the car
Yeah.
with Michael.
That's $1 million question.
I mean, that to me is like that stuck with me for sure. So looking for her, they turned up all these other bodies. Do you think at one point early on the police thought it could be a serial killer? I mean, what struck me the most was they're like, oh, well, it's a marsh and it's swampy and you know what I mean? It was every bad excuse in the book, and it's infuriating to watch.
Yeah. I think there was a divide within the police. I think Richard Dormer, who was the first commissioner who got the case, was alarmed and, thought that it could be a serial killer. I think there were others within the police department who were disputing that theory. And frankly, I'm not even sure they were disputing that theory because they had good evidence to dispute that theory. I think they were, and this is men sometimes, I think they were just disputing it because they didn't like each other, and the DA and some of the other guys wanted to have a different point of view on it. Like, I don't think they had they're like, oh, well, these bodies are this way and this person is that way. So like maybe they're not related. But of course, like profiles will tell you people change their MOs. So in some ways, I think they were disagreeing because they wanted to be disagreeing. But that type of dysfunction did nobody any favors. Dormer retires, this police commissioner I was talking about, and then another man comes to run the police department, and that's Jimmy Burke.
And we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. I'm trying.
Okay.
You do such an amazing job of weaving all these stories together, but I'm trying to like,
I'll take your lead, Melissa. Yeah.
Trying to make it all make sense in almost the episodic form. Sure. Because for me, it was, like I said, 3 distinct different episodes with the one theme pulling through.
For sure. Yeah.
How did the people in Suffolk County react when these bodies just start floating up and washing up? Was there an outcry in the community going, we're scared, what is going on? Or was it one of those situations where they're like, it's New York?
I think that, of course, you'll get all kinds of characters out in Long Island and here in New York, but I think that it was alarming. I mean, there were 4. Finally, when they started looking and they sent their search dogs and they sent these big crews through the brush and they started finding,
which was obscenely late.
Right. So it's like 6 months after Shannan goes missing, they start looking, they think they're looking for Shannan, but they end up finding 4 skeletons wrapped in burlap, all spaced near each other. And none of them Shannan. So, they start to think, okay, what do we have here? They keep looking and they find more and more body parts disposed in different ways. I think when they identified the bodies, the police went to great lengths to say, oh, these women are working in the sex industry. You don't need to worry because you're not like them. And that kind of reassurance, non-reassurance infuriated the families. And if it actually comforted the community, I don't think it should have, because you had a serial killer running around your neighborhood, and who's to say he only wants, who's to say who those other, you found body parts, you don't know who those people are. So it's a false security.
How did you get access to the 911 tapes? Because you start the documentary with Shannan's actual voice calling 911. You get into all the corruption and which we'll get into next, what that was going on in Suffolk County. How did you get access to those tapes?
Well, it's an interesting story. Shannan's family had heard the tapes when she first went missing. And then when they tried to get them back because they wanted to have them analyzed, they said they're trying to come, and they were really trying to understand what the heck happened to her that night. The police wouldn't share them. And that, of course, led to many conspiracy theories. Like, what are they hiding? Like, this is our daughter, our sister's 911 call. So finally, the family sued, and they got the tapes released. So the tapes were released. I can't remember what year. I would have to check. But we were able to obtain them because of the family's lawsuit.
I don't know. The whole thing is crazy. When you made Lost Girls, had you already met the families of these women? And then how did you go back and say, hi, I want to do a deeper dive nonfiction?
Yeah. So for Lost Girls, as I mentioned earlier, was really quite, focused on Mary Gilbert and Shannan Gilbert. Mary Gilbert, who is now deceased, and that's another story.
Yes, it is.
I met with her before making that film. We talked about it. We talked about her character. We talked about her family's struggle. We talked about what was important to her. And then ultimately I met the other women and family members who were, sadly connected to this case. Once they arrested Rex Heuermann for these crimes, I reached out to all of the families again, first to, share my hopefulness that they might have some closure and information, but then also to say, like, let's do this. And I think, look, a lot of people were asking them to be in documentaries, and there's a lot of salacious stuff out there, and I think there had been a level of trust that had already been established, so they were probably more receptive than had I just been a stranger out of the cold.
How hard was it and how much faith did they have to put in you that you were going to tell this story accurately?
I mean, I think whenever anybody does a documentary with a filmmaker, it is such an enormous leap of faith and trust, and it is brave, and it is crazy in some ways, right? I mean, you don't have control over what's going out there, but at the same time, most of the docs I made are with people who don't really have their stories told properly, or whose voices aren't heard. There are some exceptions to that. I've certainly made docs with people who have platforms, but in the large part, it's been people whose stories are overlooked. And I don't know how you like build that trust. You have to. I always tell people to watch other things I've made, and think about it from that perspective. It's a huge leap of faith, and I'm so grateful when folks like do that homework and decide to join me.
One of the things I found interesting was you never address how these women, I mean, you do lightly, became or were forced into becoming sex workers. Was that
Right,
a conscious choice? I mean, you do touch on it. We know with the one that she had, problems paying her rent and her child was going to be taken away. But with the others, we really never get into their real backstory of how they ended up in this place.
yeah, I think I think there's a bunch of reasons for that. I think that they're gone,
Hmm.
and their family members, they know pieces of it.
Right.
Some of it is kept from your mom,
Yeah.
right? So I think there's part of that. And I think that with Maureen, who is one of the victims, Maureen Brainard Barnes, we were able to find a young woman who she did her escorting and client she who they advertised together on Craigslist, so they did it together. So in that case, I think we were able to tell the story. Like she needed extra money. She was trying to do some modeling as well. She, had a custody battle with a guy who was trying to take her kid and pay rent. And this was a way. I mean, it's really about making a living. Um, and I think from, what I knew from the other women, it was quite a similar story, like trying to make it in the beauty industry. Another one was getting their cosmetology license, and it was a way to augment that income. None of them well, actually, there is one of the women whose aunt um, believes she was trafficked and forced into it. So I think there is that, but that it wasn't something we were able to prove. But I think for many of them, it was a similar story, which was they had dreams, they had other lives that they were pursuing, and they were doing this in the short term to make the rent.
You talk a lot to the press that covered this story
Mm.
because it felt like a lot of the reason the story wouldn't go away was because the press wouldn't let it go away, which is usually the reverse of what people want. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People are like, go
Leave me
away.
alone. Yeah.
So how odd was it? Because I was thinking about this interviewing press, interviewing reporters. I mean, it used to always be a joke, as you could tell when the press had been at the craft service table, because it was just like mauled when they were, doing something. You're like, oh yeah, free food, it's all gone. So that to me was very interesting
No, it's a
because,
great
well, also
point.
because
Yeah.
they also all were pretty good interviews as
Yeah.
subjects.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. And it's a great point. And it's something that the mothers learned very early on was we can find allies in the press. Like this is a big story. We're in the big media market here. There's a lot of press here. Like the police are dragging their feet. It's been months and months. I mean, think about what happens when a college kid goes missing, on a spring break trip. Like the entire
Right.
world focuses, everybody's looking, right? Or a young jogger, goes missing in a park in DC, like, and she's
Right.
works in a political office. The entire world stops and looks for her. Nobody was looking for them. So they quickly figured out, okay, the press is going to be my ally here. This is a big story. And therefore, they were part of my story. One of the women who I interviewed, her name was Jacqueline Gallucci. She wrote for the Long Island Press. Like she was one of the first ones to start putting together before there were bodies found. This woman went missing on Long Island. She saw missing posters in her grocery store and then saw other, and she started to piece together the story even before, the cops were putting together that there were a whole bunch of women who had put ads on Craigslist who were going missing in their neighborhood. So they were a big part of the story and a real lesson in actually empowerment for how the women, regular people, took this story by the horns and made this happen.
And because of the press, you then uncovered this incredible story of corruption.
There we go.
And I mean, the thing that, which I'll let you tell sort of what happened, but when it was so corrupt that the Suffolk County Police Department turned away help from the FBI. They really wanted to be insular in this because they wanted to cover up that there was a whole other crazy story going on.
Look, if you're like, running your police department as like your personal crime pocketbook, the last thing you want is the FBI hanging around, right?
Right.
Early on in the case, when Commissioner Dormer ran the Suffolk County Police Department, they worked hand in hand with the FBI. They developed a profile. Hearing that profile now, which we include in the film, it's chilling. The profile was right on. They followed the cell phone data. They knew that the killer was probably somebody who lived in this certain area around Massapequa and went to work in Midtown Manhattan. That was dead on. The police doing interviews knew the story of what happened when Amber Costello went missing, that there was a John who was huge, almost, between like high 6 feet, like 6 foot something, who drove a green Chevy Avalanche.
Those two guys, Bear and I don't remember the other one's name. Dave, I loved them. Especially at the end where they're like,
give them their own show, Melissa.
Yeah, literally, because at the end they're like, we told them. I mean, they're just like incensed.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's crazy making, right? So
yeah.
I mean, look, in retrospect, it's crazy making because they were right? They had the right guy. Yeah. It could have been like, okay, their lead would have gone nowhere, but their lead was the lead, right?
Yeah.
So you have this really good information. But as soon as Jimmy Burke takes over the Suffolk County Police Department, he jumps like, I don't know, a million ranks, right? He's at one level. When Commissioner Dormer retires, DA Spota, the DA of Suffolk County, promotes him and he jumps over all kinds of people, becomes the chief of police of Suffolk County. They kick out the FBI. In fact, they send memos saying, you're not even allowed to talk to the FBI. They pull guys who had been working the case off the case just because they don't like them. And so nothing happened. They did not make it a priority. There were cops who were on this case who did keep checking in with the families, who were good guys, who continued to maintain communication. I can't say for sure they were doing nothing under Jimmy Burke's reign, but what I can say is once they got rid of those guys in command.
Well, and there's a whole separate story about the relationship between those two.
Okay, so DA Spota and Jimmy Burke go back to when Jimmy Burke was a teenage juvenile delinquent who was acting as ultimately groomed by DA Spota to act as a snitch for the police. Okay, so this goes back. It's like the most like crazy Long Island dive. There's a big case in Long Island, the Jimmy Pius case, where back in the day, decades ago, where a little boy goes out one night riding his bike. He doesn't come home. Terrible crime. He's found the next day, dead, rock stuffed down his throat. The entire
horrible crime.
Horrible crime. And they couldn't solve it. And finally, one of the prosecutors, this guy Spota, brings in this guy, Jimmy Burke, who puts it all together for him. And guess what, Melissa? It's on tape. We have it in the show.
I know. You're just like, Your jaw just goes like, what?
So
You just go
yeah,
like,
so Jimmy Burke gives
wow.
the really important testimony, which ends up solving this case or incorrectly solving this case. But because there are a lot of people who say they got the wrong guys, and that sets up a relationship that will plague Suffolk County for decades. These two guys in cahoots. They're running. Jimmy Burke is he's beating up perps. He's having sex with sex workers and leaving his gun there that gets stolen. Like he's really like a mess. Um, and
Didn't they find like porn in his car?
Not just porn, yeah, snuff films they found.
Snuff films, yes.
Yes, and ultimately, and there's a bunch of guys who are working for him who are um, trying to get the word out that this guy's corrupt. One of the guys is acting as a source to Newsday, to a local paper. They think he's the source. They think he's the lead, and they end up tracing his phones. What do you call it? Bugging his phone, and they find out that he's leaking. They end up doing this huge intimidation thing, driving by his kid's school, visiting. I mean, this is real mobster, Tony Soprano behavior. So this is why he kept it quiet. He was able to intimidate these guys and make them afraid. Ultimately, one of the most unlucky crooks around, a guy named oh my God, Christopher. What is his last name?
We can just call him Christopher.
A guy named Christopher breaks into Jimmy Burke's car one night. He finds in the back of the car. He doesn't know it's the police chief's car.
No, he's just someone breaking into cars.
He's somebody breaking into cars. And he sees in the back of the car dildos, snuff films. But then he also sees police badge, police car badges. Oh my God, this poor guy. He gets picked up, he gets brought into the station, and he gets the hell kicked out of him.
He talked about he was chained to the floor.
Chained to the floor. He has his face kicked in. I mean, he is brutalized. Ultimately, he makes a complaint, and it's always the cover up. They crack down on these guys. Don't talk. Cone of silence. And they were able to get Jimmy Burke and DA Spota because it was the cover up of what happened to Christopher Loeb that ended up bringing down this empire of corruption in Suffolk County.
And in the meantime, they're still finding bodies, and all these missing are still floating out there. The story of them.
Like, yes, none of these families have justice. There's a serial killer acting unhindered. We don't know. We don't know at this point how many people he will be ultimately charged and found guilty of killing. He's charged for 7 right now. That number could grow. Some people speculate maybe, he'll make a deal and he'll plead to more and avoid the death penalty, but talking about this. But he ultimately, what's happening on this case is a lot of nothing. So finally, when they're able to get rid of this. Okay, Melissa, you have a question. Go ahead.
No, how did they figure out that it was Rex?
How did they figure out that it was Rex? Well, it took them about 6 weeks. Okay.
And which is crazy that that's all it took.
Right. So, okay, that's not totally fair. Okay, once they get rid of Jimmy Burke, some things happen. All of the records, I mean, this sounds so basic, right? But everything gets digitized. Mm-hmm. It's just like people writing things on paper. They put it into a computer, they digitize it. That means they can cross-check things. Chevy Avalanche, 6'2" Ogre, things that come up. They can search through the records in a better way. They put together this Gilgo Beach task force, and within 6 weeks, they get these clues. There's somebody who lives in the Massapequa area. Where are these cell phone numbers, we're calling in and out of? He works in Manhattan. Oh, good. The FBI said that back in 2011 with Richard Dormer. He fits the profile. How many guys who are living in this box fit that profile, drive that Chevy Avalanche, you do some police work. And they came up with this name of Rex Heuermann, and they started to follow this guy and ultimately collect his DNA off of a discarded pizza crust. And they were able to match that DNA to some of the DNA that was found on these bodies on the women who were wrapped in burlap years ago. So it is really a tragedy that it took all those years. We don't know if other people, well, we do know some other people did go missing after Shannan Gilbert went missing when they should have been looking. We don't know how many other people could be connected to this case and lives could have been saved, but we do know how long these families had to wait, and how long they were made to feel that their loved ones didn't matter, by a system that was not taking their cases seriously.
One of the things that I found different, because normally in these documentaries, like, really? It was Bob? Oh my God. No one had any idea till the dog came back one day carrying a femur.
Oh
You know,
God, yeah.
you always hear those stories. Everyone said, oh yeah, they're weird. Yeah, yeah, not surprised. How, I mean, because you show the whole neighborhood, and then it is this just dilapidated nightmare of a house. They even talk about the kids would like cross the street on Halloween to get away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. And he did creepy things with his coworkers too. I mean, one of his coworkers, I mean, this didn't make it into the show, but one of the coworkers talked about how she went on vacation once, and she was like, he asked her where she was going to go. And she said, "This is my vacation. I'm not telling you where I'm going." And she was on like a cruise. And one day a note came under her door. "Hi, it's Rex. I know where you are." He liked to intimidate people. So he was creeping out people in all different kinds of ways, all threats. So yes, there was not tremendous surprise, which makes you think, like, God, you knew at Massapequa, you knew a lot of stuff. Like, could you have, how could this have been solved sooner? And yes, he was living in a house that he had lived in since he was a child, and he was, according to family members, abused in that house, and he stayed living there.
And the
And
house
then
is it's like nice house, nice house. Oh my God, this is about to fall down. Nice house.
Yeah, his family members said it was basically like a museum to his child. I mean, it had not been touched. And if we're to understand that his childhood is as horrendous as it was, there's just something really dark and kind of psychologically obvious here,
Yeah.
right? Like that this is a guy who was living out this stuff. And by the way, lots of people have terrible childhoods, and it's in no way is anyone making an excuse. It's just like pretty obvious what happened here. Yeah.
Yeah, some therapy could have been useful.
No.
His family, I found them fascinating in two ways. One is the wife, his wife, I almost felt like she knew something was wrong, but closed her eyes, that something was off. And then the fact that the press is camped outside of their house, and yet they're sitting outside on the front porch, hanging out, being filmed, and they never put the house back together after the police had been there. It was like, suddenly it looked like hoarders.
I mean, you have to wonder about the mental health status of the family, and you have to wonder, putting the house back together when maybe you are experiencing trauma and you do have mental health challenges is just not something that's going to happen. I mean, we reached out to the family. We asked them to be part of the doc. We thought that because our doc, they positioned themselves as victims also. We thought because we were making the doc that actually featured the victims, that like they should be represented too if they truly were victims. They declined. It's been reported that they took a deal where they were paid a lot of money to be in a doc. That was not something we were gonna do. And so I never got to talk to them. But the police have never suspected them of having concrete knowledge of any of this. But certainly there are a lot of red flags there.
Yeah. But also, I mean, the press is sitting out front and you're sitting on your porch. That's what I found so odd.
Yeah. Well, but like you said, the police tore the house apart, like, and they hadn't touched it. And maybe you do need some fresh air every once in a while. The cop, I mean, anything can make sense in like when you have a logic of tragedy and mental illness, right? So like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Rex is still waiting to go on trial, but the fashion police in me has to ask a very shallow question.
Mm.
Why is it that all serial killers dress exactly the same? They all have the same they all have the same glasses. They all like dress exactly the same.
Oh God. I mean, I made a doc series for HBO called I'll Be Gone in the Dark.
Yes.
And Michelle McNamara wrote a book about her search for who the Golden State Killer was.
Yes.
Tragically.
And and she passed and she was Patton Oswalt's wife.
Exactly.
I know the whole story.
Patton, one of the greatest humans out there. And tragically, Michelle did not get to see the arrest of Joseph D'Angelo for the Golden State,
Right.
as a Golden State Killer. But she had him. Like there is a frickin' type, right? And I loved what she said about it, because it's like the only thing interesting about these guys is their absence. Is like when you don't know who they are. Then as soon as you see them, they're the most predictable, boring, vacant, lousy dudes out there. Nothing, right? And here's another one.
Yeah, they all.
You want to talk about the fashion of it? I'm going to just the soulless old white man. That's who they are.
But it's right. Well, I agree, but I'm just saying it's so funny. You see the the perp walks and all this stuff, and you're like, literally, they all are wearing the same thing. They all have the same frame glasses. Like it's bizarre. And I think it's what you're saying is just the plain person you would not notice.
Yeah. I mean, but the difference with Rex is he was noticed, right? He was so
huge. He was
6'8", yes, Yes, but
he didn't blend.
Yes, he did not blend. He could not disappear in a crowd. Which is why, solving this case taking so long is even more incredible,
How much longer are you going to follow this? Are you going to follow it through his trial?
Oh God, yeah, I want to be at that trial. I mean, I'm sure there's more we will learn about this case, Melissa. There's still so many questions. They just added they just identified 2 more victims by name, who were only known as Peaches, and there was a toddler, they were Peaches because she had a tattoo with Peaches. So, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot more to learn, and I would like the families of all these unknown victims to have answers.
So what is next?
Oh boy. Well, next we're waiting to see Rex go to trial.
No, but I mean, for you, what is next? Are we going back to? Are you now going to make a feature? Are you doing another document? Because you've done these incredibly high-profile, very acknowledged is the wrong word, but critically acclaimed documentaries, and you've done critically acclaimed films. So
the next thing
where are you going next?
Okay. Well, the next thing that's coming out that we should talk about is we have a doc-series coming out with Amazon on the Idaho murders. So that will be coming out this summer. I don't know the exact date yet. But that is a story in which we also have the participation of the families and friends, and it will blow your mind. I look forward to hearing your thoughts about that one when that one comes down the line.
So that's exciting. You are an incredible storyteller in the sense that you were able to weave, again, 3 separate stories with still an ending that is hanging, but that we got the guy.
Well, thank you for noticing that. Yeah. I mean, we tried to, I mean, it is, when you have the trust of folks with their stories, you work your butt off to do it right. So,
well, it has been a pleasure. Gone Girls, the Long Island serial killer, now streaming on Netflix, but also Good American Family, now streaming on Hulu. Liz, thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa.